Well, in Osage law, a marriage is defined as a civil contract, was defined as a civil contract between a man and a woman. And last year, in the early part of April, legislation was proposed by one of my colleagues in the Osage Nation Congress to change that definition to, instead of a man and woman, to two persons. Very simple, very short and brief change to the legislation with a profound impact, because essentially that then meant that the definition would include gay marriage or same-sex marriage, which hadn't been performed in our court system. I introduced an amendment in a committee that took that out, but did insert into another part of the law to allow or call that the Osage Nation would recognize same-sex marriages from other jurisdictions. So therefore, if you were married elsewhere in the county or the state or the nation, and you brought your marriage certificate in, if you were a same-sex couple, that was acknowledged and recognized, and you had similar benefits as heterosexual relationships. So that passed. But the same-sex community was not satisfied with that. I saw multiple conversations in social media that felt like that wasn't enough. They still felt like basic rights were not being respected. And so another bill was filed last fall regarding, once again, amending the definition to include or two persons rather than a man and a woman. This time, rather than continuing to have this legislation came through, I introduced a committee substitute that basically allowed for a referendum vote so that the Osage people could vote in the privacy of the polling booth to make their decision. You know, we in Congress are broadcast live during our sessions and very aware that our constituents are watching us, either watching us live or watching us on recorded media as to how we vote and how we explain our vote if we choose to speak. Many of us are very aware of that, feeling very pressured, whereas a voter in the voting booth doesn't have to explain their vote to anybody. No one knows how they voted. And so I felt, and did some of my colleagues, that that was best. And so the Congress voted to approve that referendum vote, so the people voted and the people have spoken. Now you might go into, well, we didn't get the vote out, not enough people came in to truly vote and express their opinion. That may be true, but the vote is the vote and the people have spoken. That's all you really have to know. But there's different parts to legislation, the definition in the code, how the bill is mentioned. Some people said that this referendum vote allowed the nation to recognize same-sex marriage. Same-sex marriage was already recognized. The final effect of this referendum vote is that same-sex couples can now be married in the Osage court system. That's the primary effect of it. And it was put on the ballot. And in our system of government, the language in the ballot is drafted by the Attorney General's office. So the Congress does not draft that. It's drafted by the Attorney General's office. So that should make it generic, right, and objective. And the results of the vote, by 77 votes, essentially the measure passed. And so the definition of marriage was changed to that as marriage is a civil contract between two persons.
Equality. It had been authored before myself by Congresswoman Shannon Edwards. It had failed. There had been some amendments placed into the legislation that allowed for individuals of the same sex, if they were able to get a marriage certificate somewhere without Osage Nation being involved, they were able to bring it to the Osage Nation and it was going to be recognized. But in my eyes, that wasn't true equality. True equality was what is allowed for the heterosexual couple to come up and get a marriage license through our judicial was not being honored for same-sex couples. And so I picked up the legislation and authored it. It was a second go-around for this Congress. There were people that spoke to me that were for it. There were people that spoke with me that were against it. I even heard from a good number of people that didn't care one way or the other, and some of them didn't vote. I even heard from the people that opposed it, but for whatever reasons, they didn't want to vote against it. And so I had a good number of people that said, I really don't know if I can support this. I'm just not going to vote. Didn't ask them what their reasons were. It's democracy, their choice to vote or not. But I would say humbling. I'm happy to help in any way that I can to bring equality to the Osage people. I think that our younger generation is very accepting. They are very forward thinkers, and I would say that a large portion of why this did pass was our younger generation. I think that they're moving forward. They see the issues that Native Americans and their tribal members have had to overcome historically, whether it's women's right to vote, women's right to own land. It's exciting, and I do see more nations if they put it out to a vote to the people. I think that sometimes elected officials get too wrapped up in what I'm trying to represent the people that voted me in office. But if they put that question out to the people, I think they're going to be surprised. And I think that we knew that this legislation wasn't going to pass through this body of Congress. We knew that. And I was a proponent of putting it out to the people. Now, I wasn't a proponent of wanting to really go the special session or special election route where there was an additional cost. I would have preferred for it to go on the ballot in our next general election. That wasn't the case. We put it out for a special election, but the people spoke, and I'm a believer in democracy. And if it had not had passed, I would have been disappointed, but again, the people would have spoken. But we saw what they had to say. It did pass. It was very close, but I do think that tribes are hearing more from their constituents, and the constituents are speaking and saying, this has been ruled on at the federal level. There's been a lot of time, money, arguments, debates, on this one issue, and while we are sovereign, the majority of people feel that this is an equality issue and that everyone deserves the same rights.
We've been covering it for 2 years. They've been talking about it within our Osage Nation Congress for about 2 years. And first it was the community reaction. The local community is, in my opinion, would be against it. But our out-of-state voters and out-of-community, I guess you could say, voters were for it. And the only way that we could gauge community involvement or how people were thinking was by our Facebook page, our social media sites, because people were very forthcoming about their opinions. And especially after the vote, the official vote, there were many comments from around the country, from Osages living in the United States that were for it. But most of the people that commented against it were local. There's an interesting culture with the Osages because local Osages that live here in the county, in the Osage County, are majority Catholic. And if they're not Catholic, they're Baptist. And that is just a generalization. But also we have Osages that are members of the Native American Church. And most of those religions, not the Native American Church per se, but the Catholic and Baptist, do not approve of gay marriage. So most of the dissenters on our Facebook page were of Catholic or Baptist religions.